They say time reveals all truths, but as I stood in the velvet-draped parlor of my late sister's estate, surrounded by smiling strangers and carefully rehearsed condolences, I realized something else entirely. Time doesn't uncover the truth, it buries it. Layer by layer, beneath wealth, reputation, and polished lies until someone brave, or broken, comes along to dig it up. Hello and welcome. My name is Eleanor Voss, and what you're about to hear isn't just the story of a will or a family dispute. It's the unraveling of decades of manipulation, secrets sealed behind velvet curtains, and the unexpected strength of a woman dismissed as weak for far too long. This is my story, and I've waited half a lifetime to tell it. Grief is a strange thing. It arrives late, often uninvited, and never alone. As I stood inside the parlor of the Whitlow Estate, my sister Margaret's pride and prison, I felt none of the grief I was expected to feel. Instead, I felt like a trespasser at my own execution, surrounded by faces that knew me, but never saw me. That parlor, once a place of our whispered childhood games, now bore the scent of lilac perfume, over-polished mahogany, and barely disguised tension. They had redecorated, of course. Margaret always hated anything that lingered too long in its original form. The room had been swathed in deep red velvet, from the drapes to the furniture, giving it a strange, theatrical warmth. As if someone had staged this funeral like a final act in a drama where the ending had already been written, by her, from beyond the grave. A soft murmur rose from the cluster of mourners by the fireplace. Old friends, newer enemies, and the well-dressed vultures of inheritance all floated through the room. I watched them sip their tea and pretend to mourn. No one looked at me for too long. They weren't sure whether to pity me or fear me, and I wasn't about to help them decide. Margaret had died suddenly, or so the family said. A fall down the staircase. An accident. The death certificate said cardiac arrest. But I had known Margaret all my life. She never fell. She calculated every move, every word, every breath. She never let go of control unless she was passing it into her own carefully chosen hands. And that's what chilled me, because nothing about this felt like a release. It felt like a hand still gripping the room, guiding the outcome from the grave. And I was right. A sharp tap of a crystal spoon against a glass silenced the room. My nephew, Charles Whitlow, stepped forward. Impeccably dressed, naturally. Tailored navy suit, his late mother's gold cufflinks. His face was a well-practiced mask of solemn respect, but I'd known him as a boy who could smile and lie in the same breath. That hadn't changed. "Thank you, everyone, for being here today," he began. "My mother would have been honored by your presence. She always believed in family unity and in preserving the dignity of the Whitlow name." I nearly choked on my tea. Margaret believed in control, not unity. She left behind not only a remarkable legacy, but also a final letter, a message she asked to be read only in this room, with her loved ones gathered. There it was. The catch. Margaret never left anything behind without a plan. My heart ticked louder in my chest. Charles unfolded a sealed envelope, thick ivory paper etched with her initials. M.W. The very sight of it pulled me back to memories I'd spent decades burying of Margaret dictating the rules of our lives while father turned a blind eye. Of how she climbed to the top of the family hierarchy not by merit but by manipulation, inch by inch, until even I began to disappear behind her shadow. She wrote, Charles continued, "To those I leave behind, know that love is not the only legacy. I have watched, I have remembered, and I have chosen. The estate will be divided not by blood, but by worth. Some of you have earned more than your surname. Others will walk away with nothing. In my absence, truth will rearrange the room." A sharp intake of breath cut across the velvet hush. Murmurs. Shifting eyes. And so Charles concluded, "Her solicitor has requested we remain for the reading of her full testament, to be held privately, here, within the hour." I didn't move. Neither did the others. But I felt it, every person recalculating their alliances, their bloodline value. They were trapped in Margaret's final game. And me? I was just beginning to realize I'd been drafted into a war I thought I'd already escaped. Because whatever was in that letter, it wasn't written for them. It was written for me. And Margaret never wrote anything without a knife hidden in the ink. The guests were asked to wait in the parlor, but I slipped away. While the others lingered in soft conversations and faux whispers, I took the opportunity to walk the house, her house, for the first time in 20 years. My heels clicked softly against the marble floors, the sound oddly soothing in the silence that now cloaked the grand corridors. The Whitlow Estate was as much a mausoleum as it was a mansion, with high ceilings and even higher expectations buried into every crevice. The last time I had walked these halls, I was holding a suitcase and a swollen heart. I'd left not with a goodbye, but with a slammed door and my sister's words echoing behind me, "You were never built for legacy, Eleanor. You crumble too easily." Yet here I was, standing among her legacies, wondering if it was the brittle who survived longest after all. The walls were still covered in portraits, Margaret's collection of ancestors and aristocrats, many of whom had contributed nothing but stern expressions and diluted bloodlines. Her own portrait hung above the main staircase. Oil on canvas, thick brushstrokes softening the sharpness of her jaw, but not enough to erase the cruelty that lingered in her eyes. The artist had caught that much at least, whether by accident or allegiance, I'd never know. I paused at the base of the stairs. Her bedroom was at the top, of course. She'd claimed the West Wing decades ago, shutting herself off from the rest of us. It wasn't out of a need for privacy, it was about control. She liked to see who came to her and who stayed below. I ascended the steps slowly, my hand grazing the oak railing. Everything was exactly as I remembered, right down to the faint scent of lavender and iron. At the landing, I turned left, toward the West Wing, expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. Her room opened to me like an unspoken challenge. It was colder than the rest of the house. The curtains were drawn, the velvet ones again. She'd had a taste for the dramatic. Her bed was made perfectly, not a crease out of place, as though she'd never left it at all. But what drew my attention wasn't the bed or the bookshelves or even the long bureau with its glass bottles of perfume and powder. It was the writing desk. The surface was immaculate, save for a single object, a leather-bound journal with a golden clasp. I approached cautiously. My instincts screamed at me not to touch it. Margaret had always been the kind of person who set traps not with bait, but with silence. But curiosity, especially the kind that had brewed for decades, has a gravity of its own. I opened it. The pages were dated. Neat, even handwriting, hers, unmistakably. But the entries weren't the musings of a woman documenting her final years. They were lists. Notes. Names. Events catalogued with precision, like an archivist chronicling the sins of everyone around her. And at the top of the first page, in red ink, the ones who betrayed me and the one who never did. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. Every family member was there, Charles, Lillian, and Joanna, even the staff. She had documented secrets, failings, manipulations. And then, halfway through, I found something else. A page that bore only my name, Eleanor Voss. There was no bitterness in her notes about me, no accusations. Just one line, she still doesn't know what she gave me. And I will not tell her. Not yet. My mouth went dry. What had I given her? I reached the bottom of the page where a smaller note had been added in haste. I read it twice, then a third time, before my mind accepted the words. If I don't make it to the end, the solicitor knows the truth. He'll hand her the key to the velvet room. The velvet room. Not this parlor, not her bedroom. Something else. Something she'd hidden. A soft knock pulled me from the pages. I closed the journal and turned. It was Charles. "And Eleanor," he said smoothly. "We're ready for the private reading." I studied him for a long moment. Margaret's son. Her perfect heir. But maybe not as perfect as she once believed. If she was keeping records like these, then perhaps she saw cracks in his foundation long ago. I followed him silently, tucking the journal beneath my coat. The game had begun. But this time, Margaret wasn't the only one playing. The room chosen for the reading was the East drawing room, less ornate than the parlor but still drenched in wealth. Crystal sconces flickered against the walls. A long table had been cleared of its usual tea service, and instead bore a single brown briefcase and a decanter of brandy. The guests had been trimmed down now. Only family. Only the ones who thought they mattered. Charles sat at the head, naturally. His younger sister, Lillian, flanked him, always trailing behind, wearing her grief like a scarf she wasn't sure how to tie. Cousin Henry, with his eyes scanning everyone else's reactions instead of focusing on his own. And then me, quiet Eleanor, the ghost they had long since filed under irrelevant. The solicitor, Mr. Holbrook, was already seated. An aging man with wire-rimmed glasses and a neutral expression too well-practiced to be trusted. He didn't offer condolences, only protocol. "Thank you all for joining," he said, his voice even and precise. Mrs. Whitlow, before her passing, issued a revised will and supplementary documents. Per her request, I will read them aloud. There will be no distribution or contest allowed until this reading is complete. I shifted slightly in my seat, the journal weighing down my coat pocket like a second heartbeat. The others looked tense, expectant. They were ready to fight. But they weren't ready for what she was about to drop into the room like a lit match. Holbrook pulled out the first envelope, broke the seal, and began. "To my beloved son, Charles, I leave what he always desired, control. Of the image, of the facade. He will inherit the public face of the Whitlow Foundation. The titles, the board seats, the photographs for the papers. He knows how to smile for the world. Let him." Charles looked relieved, smug, but Holbrook wasn't finished. "To Lillian, I leave the library and all its contents. She always searched for truth in fiction. Let her see what real stories look like, those shelved beside the ones we never told." Lillian blinked in confusion. "A library? That was all?" "To Henry, I leave nothing. Not out of spite, but clarity. You've always known how to take more than was offered. This time, I offer nothing." Henry's jaw tightened. No one looked at him. They didn't need to. Then Holbrook paused. The silence that followed was thicker than the velvet drapes in the other room. "To my sister, Eleanor Voss," he read, "I leave the only thing I ever kept from her, the truth." My breath hitched. The key to the velvet room lies beneath the painting we hated most. She'll know which one. And Eleanor, if you're reading this. I never stopped watching. You were never weak. You were just quiet. And I misjudged how dangerous that could be. The solicitor stopped there. Everyone stared at me. I didn't react. Not yet. "The remainder of the will," Holbrook continued, "will be available in writing. There are no additional inheritances or gifts. Mrs. Whitlow's estate has been divided, not equally, but intentionally." And just like that, it was over. A new kind of silence fell. Not grief. Calculation. Charles was the first to speak. "Well," he said smoothly, rising from his chair. "It appears Mother still had a flair for theater." He glanced my way. "And Eleanor, if you'd like assistance locating this mysterious velvet room, I'd be happy to know." My voice was quiet, but it sliced the air cleanly. "Thank you, Charles, but I think she meant for me to find it alone." He gave me a look I couldn't quite read, then smiled. Too quickly. "As you wish." He left the room with Lillian in tow, their whispers starting before the door even shut. Only Holbrook remained behind. He didn't pack his things. He simply reached into his briefcase and slid something across the table toward me, a key. Small, brass, worn. "She gave this to me 2 months ago," he said softly. "Said you'd come for it one day. Told me to remind you of the painting in the south corridor." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Mrs. Voss," he added as he stood, "she wasn't kind. But she was deliberate. If she gave you something, it means she knew you'd do something with it." He left. I sat there, alone, the key in my palm, still warm from his hand. The South Corridor. The painting we hated. I already knew which one. The South Corridor had always felt like a forgotten limb of the estate, quiet, narrow, and filled with relics no one quite knew what to do with. Unlike the polished showrooms of the front-facing wings, this hallway bore the wear of time and neglect. The wallpaper had faded into a sallow hue, and the sconces flickered with an uneven hum, like they, too, had grown tired of pretending. I knew the painting before I saw it. It hung halfway down the corridor, crooked as ever, just where we'd last argued in front of it all those years ago. A portrait of our great-grandfather Roland Voss, an imposing man with a thunderous brow and hands too large for the dainty frame they'd stuffed him into. Margaret hated it for its lack of refinement. I hated it for the truth it held. Roland had been the blueprint for the family's cruelty, cold, brutal, unrelenting. But Margaret, whether she admitted it or not, had inherited his spine of steel. I stood before the painting and let the silence settle. Beneath the painting we hated most, she'd written. I reached behind the frame and found the latch without much effort. Margaret had likely never expected anyone else to look closely at a portrait so many of us avoided. The latch gave with a soft click, and the painting lifted from the wall with a creak of strained hinges. Behind it, a recessed compartment in the plaster. A small metal panel, slightly rusted, with a lock embedded into its center. The key slid in without resistance. I turned it slowly, half expecting an alarm, or at the very least, the watching eyes of one of the staff or Charles lurking just out of view. But there was nothing. Only the soft groan of old metal releasing its grip. The wall swung inward, and I stepped into the velvet room. It wasn't what I expected. Not a panic room, not a hidden vault full of treasures. No gold, no artwork, no heirlooms. Just shelves. Dozens of them. Floor to ceiling. And on those shelves, boxes, files, tape-recorded messages, photographs, old contracts, receipts, letters, notes written in Margaret's distinctive hand. Every single piece meticulously labeled and dated. It was an archive. No, not just an archive. A vault of leverage. Margaret hadn't collected wealth. She'd collected sins. I pulled down a box marked C, W, 2009 and opened it. Inside, a folder labeled Cambridge admissions, bribery records, newspaper clippings, a USB stick, a typed summary of payments, names, and the timeline of Charles's sudden, miraculous acceptance to his ivy-covered future. The illusion of excellence exposed in bullet points and balance sheets. My knees weakened, but I caught myself. This wasn't just about Margaret controlling people while she lived. This room was her way of controlling them after she was gone. And now, that power had shifted. To me. I turned slowly, taking in the rest of the room. One wall was devoted to family. The other, to outside figures, politicians, investors, business partners. She had something on everyone. And in the very back, sealed in a glass case, was a black envelope with a gold seal. My name written across the front. Eleanor. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter. Handwritten. Pages long. Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if I'm gone, it wasn't an accident. That staircase never creaked when it was dry. And I never walked without the railing. Someone wanted me out of the way. I don't know who, but I have my guesses. You'll find them in this room. Use what I've gathered. Protect yourself first, then decide. Bury them or burn them all. And Eleanor, the thing I never told you. Father left something for you. Not me. You. It's hidden in the ledger at the back of the estate books. You were always his favorite. I resented you for it. I think I still do. But if someone killed me for this, then maybe the blood isn't as diluted as I once believed. Choose wisely. You've always been better at that than I was. Margaret, the paper lowered from my hands, but the weight of it pressed harder than any inheritance. Someone had killed her. Someone in this house. And Margaret had just given me the arsenal to find out who. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the edge of the velvet room, the door closed behind me, its silence thick with the weight of too many buried lives. I read through files until the candles sputtered low, and still my eyes refused to close. Every name that passed through my fingers was a strand in a web Margaret had built with obsessive precision, and now every strand led back to this house. Back to someone who wanted her gone. By sunrise, I'd made my decision. I would follow her trail, not just to understand what she left me, but to uncover the real story behind her death. And it began with the ledger. She'd written, "It's hidden in the ledger at the back of the estate books." That ledger had sat untouched for decades in Father's old study, a room no one dared to disturb after his passing. Margaret had kept it sealed, not out of sentiment, but because it held no value to her. Or so she believed. I entered the study just after dawn. The room was still heavy with the scent of tobacco and dust, caught in a time warp of heavy curtains, dense tomes, and a fireplace long since unused. The ledgers were kept in a locked glass cabinet behind his desk. I retrieved the key from beneath the floorboard. I remembered watching him hide it there when I was 9 and unlocked the doors. The books inside were old and heavy, leather-bound and lined in gold. I scanned the spines until I found the one Margaret must have meant. Whitlow Holdings, 1953 to 1980. I pulled it out and opened it slowly. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than estate records. Property values, investments, transactions. But at the very back, tucked beneath a false page, I found it, a sealed envelope with my name written in Father's firm hand. Eleanor. I sat down before I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a faded photograph. The photo was of me no older than 12, standing beside my father in front of the lake. His hand rested lightly on my shoulder. We were both smiling. "My dearest Eleanor, this family is a machine built on shadows. I regret the part one played in that. Your sister learned power through control. But you have something she never did. You understand people. That makes you dangerous, if you ever choose to be." I left the Whitlow Estate in her name because she demanded it. But the foundation, the true wealth, the original holdings remains hidden. And it belongs to you. The key is in the lockbox at the Chasefield Bank. Box 712. Your name is on the access file. Margaret never knew. If you've found this, then it means you have a choice. Use what I left you to disappear from this family forever, or finally take back what's yours. Whatever you choose, know this. You were never less than her. You were just silent long enough for them to forget your strength. Love. Father, I stared at the words for a long time, the air around me thick with memory and ache. For so long, I had accepted the narrative Margaret crafted for me, that I had no place in the family's future, that my softness was a flaw, my silence a weakness. But now I knew better. Margaret may have ruled the family in life, but Father had trusted me with the legacy. And someone very close, had wanted to erase both of us from the story entirely. I folded the letter carefully and stood. It was time to pay a visit to Chasefield Bank. But first, I had to make sure Charles and the others didn't realize what I knew not yet. Because in a house where secrets were currency, the only thing more dangerous than the truth was knowing when to spend it. Breakfast was served at precisely 9 in the East Solarium, as tradition dictated. Charles insisted on maintaining appearances, nothing less than what Margaret wouldn't have expected. I joined them late, intentionally, letting them settle into the illusion of control before I stepped in to shatter it. The room was bathed in morning light, filtered through lace curtains that fluttered in the breeze. Silver cutlery clinked against china, and the air carried the scent of eggs, toast, and tension. Charles stood when I entered, ever the gentleman when an audience was present. "And Eleanor," he said with a smile that barely touched his eyes, "we were just about to start without you." "How uncharacteristically patient of you," I replied, taking my seat across from him. Lillian offered a timid nod from her side of the table. She looked pale, as though she hadn't slept. Her eyes darted from Charles to me, uncertain of where she was meant to land. "You disappeared after the reading," Charles said, pouring me a cup of tea without asking. "Found anything enlightening?" I accepted the cup but didn't sip. Just memories, dust, an old house filled with old ghosts. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Mother always did love her riddles. I'm sure whatever she left for you is more sentimental than substantial." I met his gaze squarely. "And yet here you are, already measuring the curtains for your new office. Funny how quickly sentiment fades when power enters the room." His smile faltered for just a second. "It was enough." Lillian spoke up softly. "What was in the velvet room? And Eleanor?" I turned to her. Her eyes weren't just curious, they were anxious, almost frightened. "It's not a room," I said. "It's a vault. A place Margaret kept everything that mattered to her. Everything she feared losing or exposing." Lillian's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Charles chuckled, too forcefully. "Mother kept meticulous records. I imagine she thought of it as insurance." I set my napkin down and stood. "It's more than that, Charles. It's a mirror. And I think you're afraid of what it might show." The silence that followed was delicious. I left before he could respond. I arranged for a car that afternoon and slipped away to Chasefield Bank under the pretense of visiting the family mausoleum, a lie so convincing even the house staff offered condolences as I departed. Margaret would have appreciated the dramatics. She always did love when the dead were more useful than the living. The bank was a monolith of marble and gold trim, the kind of place built to inspire trust and fear in equal measure. After presenting my identification and Margaret's letter, I was escorted to the private vaults without question. Box 712 was nestled at the end of the aisle. I unlocked it and pulled it free. Inside, a folder, 3 passports, a black keycard, and a small flash drive wrapped in silk. The folder contained legal documents, a separate trust fund, concealed offshore accounts, deeds to several international properties. All of it quietly transferred to me by father decades ago. All of it untouched. The flash drive contained scans of letters, transcripts of conversations, more leverage, more truth. One document caught my eye immediately. A life insurance policy. Margaret's. Recently updated. With an unusual clause, in the event of unnatural death, full payout is withheld pending criminal investigation. She had anticipated foul play. She knew. And the policy named me as her sole beneficiary in such an event. It was a trap. Or perhaps, an invitation. I pocketed the flash drive and locked the rest away for now. The foundation wasn't my immediate concern. Finding out who pushed Margaret, literally or figuratively, was. I left the bank and returned home just before sunset. As I walked through the grand front doors, a shadow moved behind the upper banister. Too quick to identify. But it was watching. Waiting. They knew I was digging. And now, the clock had started. By evening, the house had shifted. Not in structure, but in temperature. It wasn't the cold that prickled my arms, it was tension, carefully disguised behind polite voices and overly warm smiles. Someone knew I'd gone to the bank. And someone was beginning to worry. I made my way quietly to the upper corridor, where Margaret had fallen or had been pushed. The staircase she died on was wide, elegant, carpeted in crimson, with a polished banister that gleamed unnaturally in the low light. It looked so innocent, so permanent. But I'd lived here long enough to know appearances were Margaret's favorite disguise. I ran my hand along the railing slowly, feeling for anything out of place. And then I found it, a nick in the banister's edge, just beneath the curl where her hand would have rested. Recent. Rough. Splintered. Something had struck it. Or someone. A blunt object, maybe? A shove from behind, perhaps while she was holding something, resisting. But what sealed it was the faint indentation on the wall nearby, shoulder height. Just deep enough to suggest a sudden collision. Not a fall. A struggle. Margaret hadn't tripped. She'd been forced down. The Velvet Room's archives held no direct proof yet, but they didn't need to. The physical evidence had gone unnoticed, overlooked, or ignored. I turned, heart steady, eyes sharper now. Across the hall, Lillian stood frozen in place. "How long have you been there?" I asked calmly. She stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Not long." She hesitated, glancing at the banister. "I didn't mean to sneak up on you." "You've done it before," I replied. That startled her. She blinked as if seeing me for the first time. I softened my tone. "Lillian, did you see what happened that night?" She swallowed hard. "No. But I heard something. A thud. And footsteps. I didn't know what to do, so I waited. Then Charles came running from the West Wing, calling for help. He told me not to move. That it was an accident. That Mother had fallen." I watched her carefully. She wasn't lying, not fully. But there was more. A shadow behind her voice. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Her gaze dropped to the floor. "Because he said if we questioned it, it would look like we were trying to paint it as foul play. That the insurance might not pay. That the estate would be frozen." Of course. Charles had orchestrated the narrative before the body was even cold. I stepped closer. "Lillian, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Did Charles ever speak to you about the Velvet Room?" She looked up sharply. "Only once. A year ago. He said Mother kept an archive of sensitive documents. That if she ever turned on him, he could use it against her. But he didn't know where it was. He was obsessed for a while. And did you help him look?" Her silence was my answer. I placed a hand gently on her arm. "If you want to make this right, you'll help me now. Not for Margaret. Not for me. For yourself. Because Charles doesn't protect people. He uses them." She nodded slowly, as if exhaling a weight she didn't realize she'd been holding. "There's something you should see," she said quietly. "In his study. He keeps a drawer locked at all times. I've seen him check it when no one's watching. He even hides the key separately." I felt the shift in momentum. Lillian was terrified but ready. "Show me," I said. That night, after the house had quieted and the staff had gone to bed, Lillian and I crept through the West Wing to Charles's study. The room was as meticulously arranged as the man himself, leather-bound books arranged by color, not content. A globe bar in the corner. A portrait of Margaret, younger, smiling faintly in oil paint. Lillian moved to the second drawer in the desk. "He keeps the key inside the vent," she whispered. I saw him reach in there once. Sure enough, tucked behind the loose grate, was a small brass key. We opened the drawer together. Inside, a burner phone, 2 sets of unregistered foreign IDs, and a folder labeled MW, contingency. I opened the folder and found a typed list. It wasn't financial data. It was a checklist. Secure life insurance override. Pressure Mother to update beneficiaries. Stage fall? Seek timing near board vote. Control narrative postmortem. Neutralize Eleanor if needed. My blood turned to ice. He had planned it. All of it. And if I hadn't returned, he would have gotten away with it. Lillian stared at the list, then looked at me, horror blooming across her face. "What do we do now?" she asked. I closed the drawer, replaced everything, locked it back, and, for the first time in years, I smiled cold and clean. "Now," I said, "we set the trap." The next morning, I invited Charles to tea. He accepted, of course. Declining would have made him look guilty, and he never played a hand unless he believed the table was tilted in his favor. We met in the rose garden, under the iron pergola where Margaret once held her garden parties. The scent of decay lingered beneath the flowers, though the gardeners had done their best to disguise it. A silver tray waited between us, porcelain cups, a fresh pot steeping, lemon slices arranged like soldiers in a line. Charles poured the tea himself. "How thoughtful." "You've been busy," he said lightly, stirring his cup without looking up. "The bank visit, the walks down memory lane, your late-night prowling. Quite the revival, Aunt Eleanor. I almost didn't recognize you." People change when given a reason, I said, folding my hands around the warm cup. Or when they realize the rules of the game were never written in their favor. His smile didn't waver, but his eyes lost their shine. We're not playing a game. No, Charles, I replied softly. You were. I've just decided to stop being the pawn. He set his cup down slowly. Are you threatening me? I leaned forward just slightly. Should I be? For a flicker of a second, the veneer cracked. His lips thinned. His fingers twitched beside the sugar spoon. But then he exhaled, and the mask slipped back into place. You always had a sharp tongue, he said, chuckling. Margaret used to say it was your only weapon. And yet here I am, I said, still at the table. The air between us stretched tight as piano wire. But I wasn't here to warn him. I was here to let him wonder. The most dangerous weapon in any war is the unknown. I rose. He stood as well, like a true gentleman, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. I'll be making an announcement soon, I said as I adjusted my shawl. A family gathering. One final event, to honor Margaret properly. You and Lillian will be there, of course. His brow arched slightly. A memorial? I met his eyes. Something like that. I walked away before he could ask more. That evening, I met Lillian in the velvet room. She was waiting, already seated, her hands trembling slightly as she reviewed another folder we'd pulled from the archive. Do you think he'll come? She asked. To the gathering? Yes, I replied. He'll think he can control it. What if he sees the trap before it's sprung? I looked at her, really looked at her. She'd grown in just a few days. No longer the obedient whisper beside Charles's shoulder. Now she stood at my side, a reluctant conspirator, but a capable one. Then we make it bigger, I said. So he can't look away. We spent the next hour assembling our strategy. I would host a tribute event in Margaret's name, invite the board, the press, the family trustees, everyone who still had a stake in the estate. And in the middle of it, I would reveal the truth. Not all of it, just enough to scorch the edges of Charles's reputation. Enough to force him to act. Because what I needed wasn't just for him to lose. I needed him to show his hand. And he would, because Charles Whitlow was never good at standing still. He needed control like oxygen. All I had to do was take it away for one breath. The invitations went out by hand. No emails, no digital footprints, just fine linen envelopes sealed with red wax and carried to each recipient like relics from a forgotten century. Margaret would have approved. She had always preferred formality when hiding venom. The event was scheduled for 3 days later. An evening tribute in the grand ballroom, complete with catered dinner, string quartet, and a small speech in her memory. The pretense was airtight, a respectable farewell for a woman of stature. But in reality, it was a noose wrapped in silk, designed for the man who'd walked free from her death. Charles. He would be seated at the center table, where all eyes could study him. Lillian would be nearby, rehearsed and ready. I would take the podium at just the right moment, not with fire, but with ice. I wouldn't accuse. I would suggest. Enough to tilt heads and raise eyebrows. Enough to loosen the stones under his feet. 3 days passed like thunder in my chest. The night of the event, the estate shimmered with polished floors and strained pleasantries. Staff bustled. Guests arrived in black suits and tasteful jewelry, offering hollow condolences like pre-wrapped lies. The ballroom filled with the perfume of wealth and well-kept secrets. Charles arrived last, punctual, poised, as if nothing had changed. He kissed my cheek lightly. And Eleanor, you look radiant. Grief has always suited me, I replied. He smiled, but I saw the flicker behind it. He was nervous. He just didn't know why. The guests dined. The quartet played. Glasses clinked, and the scent of roasted duck wafted through the air. I watched Charles carefully. He kept scanning the room, noting who spoke to whom, who laughed too loudly, who looked too long in his direction. And then I saw it. His gaze paused, narrowed, when he caught Lillian whispering with Mr. Holbrook, the solicitor. Good. That was the moment I rose. The ballroom dimmed as the lights shifted toward the podium. I approached slowly, the click of my heels sharp against the marble floor. "Thank you all," I began, "for coming tonight to honor Margaret Whitlow, a woman of great power, precision, and vision. She built an empire, and in many ways, she built us." Murmurs of agreement. Charles folded his arms, waiting, calculating. But behind every legacy is a story. And Margaret knew that. She left behind not only a fortune, but a map. One she meant for us to follow, and for some of us, to fear. The room quieted. She kept records. All of them. Not in ledgers or press releases, but in a private archive, a room few knew existed. A room that now rests under my care. A few guests leaned forward. Whispers began. I didn't raise my voice. Margaret knew someone close to her wanted her silenced. She left instructions in case of her unnatural death. Some of those instructions name names. Some hold disturbing truths. Charles shifted in his seat. And then I said it. Tonight is not about accusations. It is about transparency. Margaret believed the truth was the only form of control that outlives its keeper. And so, in the days to come, certain documents will be reviewed, shared, investigated where necessary. That was it. Just enough. I stepped back from the podium. Lillian rose quietly and walked to Charles's table, slipped a single envelope beside his wine glass. He stared at it. Didn't open it. Just stared. His jaw clenched. Across the ballroom, eyes were already turning toward him. He'd been preparing for battle. But now, the war had begun without his consent. The applause was tepid, polite, confused. I walked back to my seat and waited. Because the most dangerous man is not the one who strikes first. It's the one who has no choice but to strike last. He didn't open the envelope at the table. He waited. He smiled, clinked his glass with donors, shook hands with board members, and walked Margaret's tribute like a politician gliding through campaign season. But behind the charm, I saw the fire stoking. The crowd had shifted. Small groups whispered as he passed. Some eyes no longer met his directly. The spell of inherited respect was cracking. And he knew it. And then I said it. Tonight is not about accusations. It is about transparency. Margaret believed the truth was the only form of control that outlives its keeper. And so, in the days to come, certain documents will be reviewed, shared, investigated where necessary. That was it. Just enough. I stepped back from the podium. Lillian rose quietly and walked to Charles's table, slipped a single envelope beside his wine glass. He stared at it. Didn't open it. Just stared. His jaw clenched. Across the ballroom, eyes were already turning toward him. He'd been preparing for battle. But now, the war had begun without his consent. The applause was tepid, polite, confused. I walked back to my seat and waited. Because the most dangerous man is not the one who strikes first. It's the one who has no choice but to strike last. He didn't open the envelope at the table. He waited. He smiled, clinked his glass with donors, shook hands with board members, and walked Margaret's tribute like a politician gliding through campaign season. But behind the charm, I saw the fire stoking. The crowd had shifted. Small groups whispered as he passed. Some eyes no longer met his directly. The spell of inherited respect was cracking. And he knew it. I left the ballroom early, before dessert was served. I wanted him to find me. To make his move on my terms, not his. He didn't disappoint. I was in the velvet room 20 minutes later, cataloging the next round of evidence, when I heard the door creak open. He didn't knock. Quite the performance, he said coolly. I didn't look up from the folder I was marking. Margaret always did love theater. I thought it fitting. His shoes tapped slowly against the floor as he approached. I want to know exactly what you said to Holbrook, he said. I met his gaze. The truth. Or do you not recognize it when it's quiet? His expression sharpened. You think you're clever, using innuendo, stirring doubt without proof. But you've overplayed your hand. No, I said softly, I've only revealed that I have one. His eyes fell to the open box on the desk. The label read, C.W. Estate Interference. His jaw tightened. You've been busy, he muttered. Not nearly as busy as you were while Margaret was alive. He stepped forward, and for the first time, I saw it. The fear. Not rage. Not entitlement. Fear. He didn't know what I had. And men like Charles fear uncertainty more than exposure. You're bluffing, he said. You have bits and pieces, but nothing that holds up. I raised my brow. Are you sure you want to test that theory? He studied me in silence. And then he laughed. A low, cold sound that scraped my spine. I underestimated you and Eleanor, he said. I see that now. But here's the problem. You're still alone. He moved closer, voice dropping. No one's going to back a forgotten old woman against me. Not the board. Not the family. Not the press. You think you've rattled my position? I am this family now. All you've done is light a fire beneath a man holding the matchbook. I smiled. He didn't like that. I'm not alone, Charles, I said. I never was. You're just used to people being too afraid to stand behind me. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. Margaret wasn't. That froze him. He tilted his head slightly, calculating. She hated you. No, I said gently, she feared me. That's not the same thing. I picked up a smaller envelope from the desk and held it out to him. He didn't take it. Inside is the original copy of her updated will, I said. The one where she removed you from any control of the Whitlow Foundation's voting shares. Filed with her attorney a week before she died. Along with a recorded message explaining why. Now he blinked. You're lying. Open it, I said. Or walk away and wonder for the rest of your life. His hands shook slightly as he reached for it. He tore it open. Read. His face drained. You're bluffing, he repeated, weaker this time. Am I? I asked. Or are you finally realizing Margaret didn't leave you the kingdom? She left you the gallows. He turned to leave, but I stopped him at the door. Charles, I said softly, if you try to bury me again, this time, I won't crawl out quietly. He said nothing, just walked out, slow and stiff. The door shut behind him, and in the silence that followed, I felt it, the shift. He wasn't the threat anymore. He was the prey. Charles didn't show his face for 2 days. Not at breakfast, not during meetings, not even when a local paper ran a quiet little story on Margaret's secret archive of family documents, fed to them anonymously, of course. Just enough to stir the water, not enough to expose the source. He was panicking, but not retreating. Men like Charles never retreat. They reload. On the 3rd day, I found Lillian waiting for me in the solarium, a pale blue envelope clutched in her hands. She looked shaken, her eyes wide and unsure. He gave this to me, she said, placing it on the table. Said I had to choose. You or him. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a draft letter to the Whitlow board, appointing Lillian as co-chair in Charles's place. It was blank where her signature should have gone. He's offering you power, I said, placing it down carefully. He said if I help him discredit you, he'll step aside quietly. Let me inherit the public trust. I'd be the name, but he'd still be behind it. I nodded. A familiar pattern. She looked at me, voice trembling. I don't want it like that. I never did. I studied her face. There was still fear in her, but also something stronger now, resolve. It was the same look I once had, standing at the edge of Margaret's shadow, waiting to step through it. You have more of Margaret in you than you think, I said softly. Lillian's eyes filled with tears. That's what I'm afraid of. No, I said. It's what will save you. I handed the letter back to her. You're going to sign it, I said. Her eyes widened. And then, I continued, you're going to hand-deliver it to the board with a copy of Charles's checklist. The one we found in his drawer, along with the recordings. Lillian swallowed. Won't that ruin everything? It'll ruin him, I said. And that's the only way you walk into that seat with clean hands. We moved quickly. By sunset, the board had met in an emergency session. Charles arrived late, disheveled. He didn't speak as the chairman read aloud the transcript of his contingency plan. He didn't argue when they played the voicemail, his voice, clear and unmistakable, threatening Margaret with exposure if she didn't update her will. He didn't even flinch when the chairman said the word, expulsion. His only question was, "Who gave you all this?" The chairman didn't answer. But he looked at me, and Charles understood. Later that evening, I stood once again in the velvet room. It was quiet now. Still, I had removed the folders on Charles, locked them away in a separate case. The rest I would burn, piece by piece, in the old fireplace behind Father's study. The past had done its work. It was time to let it rest. Lillian appeared in the doorway. "They voted," she said. "Unanimously." I nodded. "You're the new public face of the Whitlow legacy," I said. "Congratulations." She looked unsure. "You should have taken it." "I didn't want it," I said. "I never did. But you fought for it." "No," I said gently. "I fought for the choice." That stopped her. She stepped inside and looked around the velvet room one last time. "What do we do with all of this?" she asked. I touched the spine of the nearest folder. "We keep it, but not to use, not to threaten, just to remember." She nodded. I handed her the key. Later that night, as I sat in my father's old chair, the house around me quiet and heavy, I realized something. For years, I'd thought silence made me invisible. But silence had made me dangerous. Because while they schemed, while they plotted, while they played their games, I listened. I remembered. And in the end, when the pieces finally fell, I was the only one who knew where all the bodies were buried. 6 months later, the Whitlow Estate stood emptier, yet heavier than ever. The air no longer reeked of ambition or perfume. It smelled of old paper and cedar, and occasionally, jasmine, Lillian's choice, not Margaret's. That was the first sign things were changing. The velvet room remained sealed now, the key kept inside a safe known only to the two of us. Lillian never visited it alone. Sometimes I wondered if she feared what was inside, or if she simply respected it. Either way, she understood its weight. She had grown into her role. The press adored her soft-spoken elegance. The board respected her intellect. And Charles? He had disappeared, quietly bought out, stripped of title and inheritance, living in exile under the family's watchful silence. I suspected he resided in Vienna or Singapore, somewhere far enough to forget, or be forgotten. Margaret would have hated that. I visited the garden often. Not the formal rose garden where the tribute had been held, but the smaller one behind the east wing. The one she and I planted when we were children, long before we wore masks, before the house swallowed us whole. I sat on the old stone bench beneath the arbor and watched the vines reclaim the lattice. Power, I'd come to learn, isn't about possession. It's about presence. And I had reclaimed mine not by shouting, but by outlasting them. One by one, they had counted me out. And one by one, they had fallen. A letter had arrived that morning. From Holbrook. Short, neat, final. With Charles officially removed and Lillian instated as successor trustee, all legal challenges have been dismissed. The estate is quiet. And you, Eleanor, have rewritten the ending. I smiled at that. Not because I had one, but because I had ended it on my terms. The velvet room no longer needed to be a weapon. It was now a reminder of who Margaret was, of what Charles tried to do, and of who I had always been, beneath the dust, the grief, the silence. Not invisible, not weak, patient. And in the end, patience is the sharpest blade of all. Thank you for listening my story. Hit like, share, and subscribe my YouTube channel for more real and true stories.